Welcome to the Hot Seat powered by Affordable Staff, David Judge. And here we are at Season 2, Episode 3 of the Hot Seat, where we release a new episode every second Tuesday and talk to industry influencers that have worked hands-on in the real estate industry, find out where they see current and future trends, and what you can do about it to support and grow your business. So today, Eva and I are interviewing Hamish Turner, who specialises as a property management trainer, consultant, and also deals in the sale of real estate businesses. So to give you a little context of this interview, Eva and I were attending a conference in New Zealand towards the end of 2018, where it pretty much rained the entire time we were there. Hamish is also a client of Affordable Staff, and he had one of his team members visiting New Zealand at the same time as our visit, so the whole thing lined up really, really well. So when we were at the conference, I noticed that Hamish always had someone talking to him, sitting there asking for advice and getting guidance around their business. And he's actually really hard to tie down, which is why we were really fortunate and excited when we were able to catch up and record the Hot Seat. So Hamish really understands how to identify the true asset value of a real estate business. With as of September 2018, when we were recording this interview, Hamish had sold about a dozen real estate businesses. And when we had spoke to him towards the end of 2018, he mentioned that he'd had a record year. So in this interview, Hamish shares areas around the industry, how it's growing, and his simple approach to building the value of a rent roll, which can be applied to any business of any size. After all, Hamish understands that a rent roll is the real asset of a real estate business. So this is a really good interview, and Hamish has a massive wealth of knowledge, and he consults with different businesses on so many different levels, including in Australia, Inspect Real Estate. So again, a fantastic interview. I'm going to stop talking. Let's get into it and roll it. Hello and welcome, David here from the Hot Seat, and I also have Eva here. How are you, Eva?
I'm very well, David. How are you?
Good. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me on the Hot Seat.
Hamish, how you going?
Very good, David.
Yes. So where are you from, Hamish?
I'm based in New Zealand. I've been here for the last 8 or 9 years. I met a Kiwi girl after coming over from Brisbane, where I formerly worked in property management there. So I've been in the industry for property management industry for 20 years across Australia and New Zealand. But I'm based in New Zealand nowadays. So yeah,
and
I do get a crossover to Brisbane each month for a reprieve from the weather. So,
yes. And how long in Australia doing property management?
Approximately 10 years either way. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, without giving away too much of my age. So,
it's the beard, it makes you look younger. Okay, so we're here with Hamish today to have a bit of a chat around the industry, find out where you've come from in the industry, where you think it is now, and where you think it's going in the future.
Sure.
Okay, fantastic. So you mentioned 20 odd years in the industry.
Yeah, so I worked over in South Australia, Adelaide, as a 19, 20-year-old as a rental clerk, and for several years. Glenelg was the office, Ray McGrath Professionals in Glenelg, who had 3 offices at the time. And then I actually worked for Terry Shear Insurance Brokers. I was the National Claims Manager for several years, and that was an Adelaide-based position. And I then moved.
So are you originally from Adelaide, sorry?
I'm actually a Kiwi, but I moved over to mid-north South Australia when I was 10 or 11 years old. And so dual citizen, one of each. Father was a Kiwi and mother's an Aussie. So, but yeah, grew up in mid-north South Australia, came to the city when I was about 19 or 20 and got into property management. I still remember now the two biggest things I had to learn were because I was a labourer, I had to learn how to shave each day and how to do my tie, and they probably took a good 6 to 12 months to get
Neither of which you're doing now.
Yeah, well, we don't wear ties over in New Zealand. Well, on the seldom occasion, weddings and funerals, but and important meetings. But for the most part, I've got about 80 or 90 ties, and I get to choose on wearing 1 or 2 of them each year. So and then they rotate. Yes, yeah, I do. Yeah. I've had a few bought for me, and I've got some pretty funky ones there, but they're a bit. I tend to bring them out if I'm back in business in Melbourne or Brisbane or Sydney. They tend to come out, but for the most part, they're hidden.
Melbourneites like to wear ties.
They do. They really absolutely do. So
Okay. So you started off in South Australia.
Yep, and Terry Shears for 3 years in the national claims role, and then. I moved to Queensland and I worked for a company by the name of Pro Rentals, which is pretty well known in Brisbane and also Australia that organically grew a book to around 1,800 managements and before selling. and then I was approximately 30 years old. I moved back to New Zealand, where all my father's side is, and I set up my own business, and I duplicated that in multiple regions around the country in a license-based model, where the licensees had full ownership of their businesses. And then approximately 3 years ago, I sold that business to focus on a young family, and have been heavily consulting and broking rent rolls. Year to date, we're September 2000 and what are we? 2018.
18.
Yeah, so I've sold about a dozen real estate businesses this year. So
Why did you get into the industry?
I actually had a back injury when I was 18. I came from the country, and I had a severe injury, and I spent probably 18 months in and out of hospital with it, and so that's how I got into the industry. So I went to a rehabilitation course, and I remember it because there were about 6 to 8 country lads, that varying injuries, and that had injuries out in the land, and I was no different. And learning how to type and, like I said, shave and use tyres. So that's actually how I got into the industry. And at the time, it was a government-run rehabilitation course, and you had to get into a government role. And I pushed heavily because I knew I wanted something to do with property. I didn't know what, but I pushed heavily. And I ended up doing work experience for 3 months in Ray McGrath Professionals in Glenelg. They were actually, which is still operational. They actually, I did, it was about 14 weeks work experience. It's quite stubborn, and before getting offered a role. But I think they were like the 5th or 6th office that I went and asked, "Can I have some work experience?"
Wow.
I knew I wanted to be around real estate or property. I just didn't, at that age, I was pretty naive, and I didn't know what, but I just knew it interested me. So,
So in your specific industry that you're working in now, buying versus growing an organic rent roll.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, there's pros and cons for each, and at varying stages, buying a rent roll can be good and bad. So, and there's a lot of pros in terms of an existing book wanting to, let's say, for example, branch into a new location, but not wanting to set up that. I mean, because you've got your infrastructure, your business already sitting there. So there's economies of scale because you shared staff and in terms of, let's say, administration or commercial leases, or so. They can be tricky to buy, and if you buy them poorly, which happens. Can be quite dangerous on a commercially speaking. So, but organic growth too. There's I think the percentage would be that there's a myth that property managers should be able to grow portfolios. The reality is that in what I see over the years, probably 10, maybe 15% of property managers have that skill set as a BDM as well. They are very different skill sets. So a lot of it comes down to the structure of the office, the pay system, whether it's commission-based or salary-based. And so there's pros and cons. It just depends on what the ultimate goal and is, and what time frame you've got. And because I mean, you could look at 20 different property management businesses. They all look completely different It's
what do you do when you're looking at assessing the value of a rent roll?
Yeah, sure. So the assessment of there's basically 5 primary factors to look at, and then there's approximately 9 secondary factors. And the primary factors create a multiple range based on location. Some of the 5 primary factors is location, past sales, but the three biggies are the average rent, the average management fee, and the number of properties, and establishing a baseline on what that is annualised in terms of a forecast on those management fees, which are typically 80% of your revenue, give or take. It's the average, about 80%, 20% is secondary. And then timing that annualised management fees over a multiplier. So if we looked in Auckland, for example, that multiplier range at the moment is around 2.4 through to 2.8. And when I say around, it is 2.4 to 2.8. and it sort of varies from year to year depending on what's going on and what changes in legislation and the general market but in your smaller regions, let's say for example Taranaki or New Plymouth or Nelson Bays, where the populations are sort of 40 to 60,000, I'd expect to see that range in the 2 to 2.5 multiplier across that annualised management fees. If you looked at a general value style business, it tends to sit between a 4 through to 6 times EBITDA, which is quite high compared to let's say a cafe, a hospitality business that runs at around anywhere from 2 to 3.5 times EBITDA. So they're great things to cash in on. They're tough to get off the ground, but they are great businesses in as much as the rent gets paid, and as long as you got your tenants paying the rent, the fees come out automatically. There's not a typical service invoice debtors type approach. The rent comes through, the fees come out, and they're very good on cash flow. So
so you obviously have to have your finger on the pulse in the industry and in the role that you're performing now, and the stuff that you're doing in Australia as well as in New Zealand. What do you see as being the biggest challenge in the industry right now?
I'd say in New Zealand it's keeping up with legislation change. There's been a lot
sort of like across both countries.
Both countries,
I think in New Zealand I think Australia's gone through a lot of they've become more accustomed to legislation updates, whereas New Zealand, are they sort of approaching that now? Roll out legislation.
There's a new one being introduced early 2019. Well, there's a bill that's been that's in progress for removing of letting fees, and over in New Zealand, letting fees are charged to tenants, unlike Australia, where letting fees are charged to the owner, and they tend to equate to anywhere from 10 to 15% of your gross revenue, so they're a big chunk of your income. So, I don't know. You can be proactive, reactive. I've seen some of my clients proactively bringing in letting fees or marketing fees to their owners. But I think the industry there'll be a workaround. It'll be in large reactive next year because everyone's sort of just holding back and waiting for it to come about. It's too big a change financially to do nothing. And
what would you see? You see legislation.
Legislation's one. Probably the other one is technology and software.
Yes. And do you see that as being a big disruptor in the next 2 years?
Yeah, I think it's a positive disruptor, though, if harnessed and used correctly, and to maintain competitive levels and profitability. So prop tech, I think, is the term that I keep on hearing more recently. So, but that's sort of revolutionising the industry of prop tech. So,
but I guess in New Zealand particularly, are the property managers are they accepting the new technology, or is this something that they're struggling sometimes with?
We're a bit more conservative Kiwis. I can say that because I am a Kiwi and I've worked across both countries. And rent rolls are not as large on average in New Zealand as to what they are in Australia. So the economies of scales, costs versus benefit. So there's lots of considerations, and there's no. It's a how long is a piece of string? Every rent roll is a different size, different location, different needs. But certainly I think we're getting better at adopting and adapting. So yeah.
And technology, because obviously you have your association with Inspect Real Estate in
That's
Australia.
Right. Yep.
How do you? Because you're at the, what would you call it, the coalface, or you have a high level view of software implementation.
Yeah.
How are you seeing businesses in Australia versus New Zealand with the stuff like Inspect Real Estate with the introduction of software and technology?
Like a comparison to Australia, from Australia and New Zealand, well, actually the Kiwis are keeping up. If we looked at inspect real estate's numbers, New Zealand is literally like another state in terms of population and growth. And there's some 150 odd offices. I'm not too sure. I'm sure Andrew would be fine with me sharing that. There's approximately 150 odd offices here in New Zealand. I know that. And New Zealand's largest group, Barfoot's, their entire group uses the software, as does Property Brokers, two of Inspect Real Estate's largest clients, actually. So, so it's I wouldn't think that we're behind or in front. We're sort of on par in terms, But I think certainly some of the easier products to use, for example, REBDM, unsophisticated. Should I say that or not? I think it's a lot. It's RE's second, as Andrew puts it, record in terms of products that were developed. There's been a significant interest in the New Zealand market in that particular product to assist with growth of the portfolios. So,
and so. In Australia and New Zealand, it'd be interesting to see if you think it's the same across both countries. How do you think a real estate business can differentiate itself in the industry?
Oh, that's a tough question.
How long do we have?
I could differentiate them by getting a consultant.
Hamish
Turner.
Yeah, I think it's a funny thing. I see simplicity is probably the word that I like to fall back on. I know when I've set up and run my own businesses here in New Zealand, and also when I worked in Brisbane for ProBrand, simplicity in terms of fee structures, in terms of communication, in terms of culture, and just ethos right throughout. It's hard enough without overcomplicating things. So where you can simplify conversions of management authorities, for example, with new clients. I know when I ran my own portfolio and businesses, I looked at that as an area that I could improve. This is just purely as an example, and minimise my agreement from a 6-pager down to a 2-pager to make life easier on transition, or for a client to sign and to get through. Transitioning over from one agency to another if the client was unhappy, and having a form that was filled in and taking it over the hands of the owner, and again making things simple. I always like the one fee based model. No negotiations, of course, because there's no secondary fees if you have one fee based model. But again, simplicity, rental guarantee. Management guarantees, so money back guarantee if the client was unhappy. So really high level of integrity and simplicity is and the industry's, for the majority is that way. So it's not to say that that's not the case, but where there's areas where things can be simplified, then being proactive and putting actions in place with deadlines to make that occur, to make it easier.
And I think as well software. So I think the integration and use of software is very important for the business for the industry moving forwards. But the seamless use of software and the seamless integration of software. So Sarah Martin, who was talking again today, she has, and she's I consider to be a fairly big innovator in the industry.
Yes.
A lot of her focus is around the use of software and technology and how it can seamlessly integrate, so a person is having a seamless experience. I think a lot of times we can use software and technology to do the opposite, to make things more complicated. And it doesn't need to be more complicated. It's like the other way around.
But I think she's also using it to make it simple, not only for the owners or the landlords, but also for her own staff.
Yes.
So, and I think that's where, she created the...
And she was talking about, we were talking about beforehand about eliminating emails.
Emails, exactly.
She has eliminated emails. So she's using Slack as a software and Trello boards. And all her staff are using those two pieces of software. And it means instead of emails getting lost, they're actually just going in Trello. So in Trello, you have different columns, and each column represents a different task or a person. And it'll get dragged across to that person. That's your task there. Once they finish, they drag it across to say it's completed. Yeah. Totally eliminates that. And I know for her, it's added a lot of value. But it's using technology and using software in a way
simplifying.
It can be sometimes a bit daunting to introduce because if it doesn't work. But free trials, most software companies will provide a free trial, and you just got to ask the question, and also focus on having somebody that's tech friendly to introduce it to the office. So,
but I think you also have to have that tech-friendly office environment so that it can be introduced into as well. If people are really resistant to change and really scared of technology, you're always going to be fighting. You're always going to be fighting. But if the team are ready and they're set, no matter how challenging it may be or how different it might be, if the mindset is there.
I'm smiling because I'm not tech friendly. I work with real estate, do a fair bit of consulting. I'd be the most untech friendly person. Well, maybe I'll close the top. But it's been embracing technology, sure. And I'm not by myself, so it is a challenge.
You surround yourself with others that can do what you can.
I hand my phone to my wife and just sort that out. I think that's the normal gesture that I have. Can you sort that? Yeah, but
Michelle, I guess that helps you out a lot as well.
Yes, Michelle, my EA. Yes.
Awesome. So, what would be your one piece of advice that Hamish would give to the industry right now?
Yes.
Gosh,
I know they're not easy questions. They're not supposed to be easy questions.
In terms of New Zealand right now, is hold on to your sit on your hands. It's a good industry. It's fun. There's I think there's some pretty cool things with prop tech helping the industry as a whole in the future. It is frustrating, the legislation changes. Not legislation changes, because I think some of the changes are really positive. It's just the amount in a short period of time. So it's just suck some air and bob back down and keep moving forward. So
And what about within Australia?
Within Australia, I think. You really got me on the hat. So again, the same sort of a thing. So I think you guys have had quite a bit of legislation change as well. So So I think my understanding is that a lot of real estate agents are sort of or property management businesses are getting bigger. That's what's happening, and a lot of smaller ones are sort of not caving, but sort of flattening out. But there's a lot of consolidation and acquisitions occurring and getting bigger and taller, I guess. If I have a visualisation, just buildings going up and then the flattening around them. So
okay, very good. Eva, you need to start the clock.
Let me get this
now. In this season, we're doing things a little bit different. We're going to ask you a series of questions.
Oh.
We call it the 60-second hot seat. And
I've already been in the hot seat a couple of those questions.
This is the 60-second. Now we're going to see how long it takes for us to get through these questions. I'm thinking it's going to be less than 60 seconds. They're not necessarily
what my favourite colour is. Okay.
Let's go.
We'll need to add that one next time. Okay, we're ready. Okay, and
Start.
go. Your number one bucket list item.
Rugby World Cup. Following a full Rugby World Cup series.
Excellent. Favourite hobby?
Diving.
Strangest thing you've ever eaten?
I don't know if I could say this aloud on Rams balls. I was dead. I was literally dead for money, and it wasn't actually that bad. It's a delicacy in some countries.
Give that a miss.
Rams balls.
Describe yourself in 3 words. Don't say Rams balls.
Crikey, another hard one. Handsome? No, is that
handsome?
Handsome, all right.
Probably. Friendly, integrity based. That'll do.
Excellent. How do you spend your first 3 hours of the day?
Coffee, walk, kids. Yeah.
When you dance, you look like
a womble.
If you had a super yacht, what would you call it?
Last question.
Susie.
That's 1 minute, David.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Hamish. We really appreciate your time and you're a real innovator in the industry. And as we finish up, tell us what you have going on in your business right now and your shameless plug of what you'd like to talk about.
Selling rent roll businesses throughout New Zealand. Three circles, as I put it: sales and acquisitions of rent rolls, health checks or business audits, valuations, rent roll valuations, where I work with the valuing firms. Those are my three main circles. There's plenty of other things I do, but they're the ones that really float my boat, so that I focus on.
And if someone wants to get in contact with you,
hamishturner.co.nz.
Yes, what did you set up?
Rentrollbroker.co.nz. So it's a more recent site, so all our listings are on there, and
And can people subscribe to like a newsletter or something like that?
Yeah, we actually have around 15,000 subscribed to our newsletter, so that's a really good question. Thanks, I should have noted that one, David. So if you go online, there is actually a subscribe button on both of those two sites. So those two sites again, hamishturner.co.nz and rentrollbroker.co.nz.
And Ira will make sure that she includes those in the show notes.
Thanks, Ira.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David, here with Eva and Hamish on the hot seat. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk soon.
All right,
Sounds
thank
good.
you.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Hamish. And before you go, I'd ask if you enjoyed the episode that you subscribe to our podcast, which you can find where you search for The Hot Seat, wherever you listen to your podcast, especially on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I also wanted to remind you that The Hot Seat is powered by affordable staff. And if I'm 100% honest, we could not put this whole thing together without outsourcing it. There's a lot of background work that goes into creating a podcast that if you've ever created a podcast, you know what I'm talking about. And without outsourcing it to our overseas team, we could not do it. I record the content here that I'm sharing with you or that you're watching now and listening to, and then I send it overseas and they handle all the audio edits, the video edits, the website, the podcast distribution, the marketing, including creating short excerpts of the podcast, the show notes, linking to different presenters' profiles, etc., etc. There is so much involved. So a special thank you to all of our team over in the Philippines for handling that. Okay, great. Thank you again for all your support, and we look forward to catching up with you in the next episode, the 4th episode of Season 2 of The Hot Seat. Talk to you again in a fortnight.